The wedding hall glittered with golden lights, chandeliers swinging softly above rows of decorated tables, the air heavy with perfume and whispers of celebration. I stood quietly in the corner, blending into the backdrop of chatter and laughter, though every beat of my heart reminded me I didn't belong there, not in the way others did. My brother, dressed in his flawless tuxedo, his face glowing with triumph, had always been the center of attention. Tonight was no different. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him, admiration dripping from every smile and cheer. Yet behind those polished smiles, I felt the familiar sting of being overlooked, the shadow that trailed behind his shine. I had accepted this role for years, telling myself it was easier to endure than to resist. But that night the air carried something sharper, a heaviness that warned me the past would not stay buried. As the ceremony transitioned into laughter-filled toasts, my brother took the microphone, his voice booming with confidence. He spoke about love, commitment, and new beginnings, his words weaving an image of perfection. Then, with a sudden shift, he glanced at me. That familiar smirk curved his lips, the same one he had worn when we were children, and he knew the crowd would side with him. He spoke my name, pulling me into the spotlight I had never sought, and with a casual cruelty masked as humor, he began to mock me in front of hundreds. He joked about my failures, my loneliness, the things I had fought so hard to bury under quiet dignity. The hall erupted with laughter, though some faces shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting toward me, unsure if it was right to laugh. I stood frozen, my cheeks burning, the walls closing in as each chuckle echoed like a dagger. It wasn't the first time he had done this. Growing up, his sharp tongue was his weapon, and I was his favorite target. No matter how well I did in school, no matter what small victories I achieved, he always found a way to cut them down, to remind everyone that compared to him, I was lesser. Our parents would brush it off as harmless sibling teasing, never noticing how the words festered in me, how they carved scars deeper than any wound I could show. Tonight was supposed to be his perfect day, and I had promised myself I would stay invisible, play my part as the quiet sibling in the corner, and let him have his moment without stirring shadows. But when his words spread like poison across the room, and laughter filled the cracks of my composure, I felt the weight of years pressing down all at once. The bride sat beside him, her smile wavering as his jokes cut deeper, and I wondered if she saw through him, if she glimpsed the arrogance behind the polished charm. Her groom, standing close by, had been watching silently, his expression unreadable as his eyes lingered on me longer than most. In that instant, I caught something in his gaze, something that didn't belong to the merriment of the evening. It was a recognition, sharp and deliberate, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. My brother, oblivious to the shift in the air, continued his mockery, enjoying the roar of approval from friends who had cheered him on all his life. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting, the foundation of his carefully built image trembling under a truth he hadn't seen coming. Every sound in the hall seemed louder, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, the shuffling of feet, but inside me there was only silence. A silence heavy with unspoken rage and a strange cold anticipation. I felt my humiliation harden into something sharper, something steadier than the tears that threatened to fall. I met the groom's eyes, and in them I found no mockery, no pity, only intent, the kind of intent that carried the weight of revelation. The whispers among the guests began to grow, not from my brother's words, but from the tension thickening in the air, the sense that something unexpected was about to happen. My brother, caught up in his own arrogance, didn't notice the shift, didn't see that the room no longer laughed quite as easily. The groom moved slightly, his body angled toward me, his voice preparing to cut through the noise. My brother was still speaking, still mocking, but his voice seemed to fade into the background as if the universe itself was dimming his spotlight. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking under his shadow. I wasn't the forgotten sibling, the quiet afterthought. I stood there, steady and unblinking, waiting for whatever was about to unfold. My brother thought the night belonged to him, that the applause and adoration were his forever, but the truth was already stirring at the edge of the stage, waiting to strike. And when the groom finally opened his mouth, turning away from my brother and bowing slightly in my direction, his first word shattered the illusion of perfection my brother had built so carefully. The laughter in the hall faltered as the groom's voice cut through the air, low yet commanding, a sound that seemed to still even the clinking of glasses. All eyes shifted, first toward him and then toward me, their curiosity sharpening into something restless, uneasy. My brother froze mid-sentence, his grin stiffening when he realized the attention was no longer his. The groom's bow, simple but deliberate, carried a weight that unsettled the room. He addressed me not as the target of ridicule, not as the shadow of my brother's success, but with a respect so unexpected it left me breathless. The word he used hung in the silence, echoing louder than the cruel laughter had moments before. And though it was only a single word, it cracked open a door to something much larger, something none of them had anticipated. For a moment, I couldn't move. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, some filled with confusion, others with dawning suspicion. My brother's face shifted, his smugness replaced by a flicker of unease, though he quickly masked it with a forced laugh, trying to brush off the interruption as some kind of joke. But the groom's expression remained unyielding. There was no humor in his eyes, no trace of the merriment expected at a wedding. Instead, there was a strange tension in the way he regarded me, as though he knew something no one else did, something he had been waiting to reveal. The bride, caught between the two men, shifted uncomfortably. Her hand, which had moments ago rested casually on my brother's arm, slipped away as if sensing a truth she wasn't prepared to face. The guests began whispering, their voices weaving together into a low hum of speculation. Was this part of the ceremony? A planned jest? Or was it something deeper, something far more dangerous? I could feel the questions rising in the air, heavy and impatient, but the groom remained calm, his posture firm, his eyes locked on me. Inside me, something stirred that had long been dormant. For years, I had carried the burden of being invisible, of swallowing pain in silence, convincing myself it was easier to endure humiliation than to fight it. But now, with the groom standing there, drawing the eyes of everyone in the hall to me with a single gesture, I felt a shift. My brother's laughter no longer echoed in my chest like a wound. Instead, it crumbled into the background, powerless against the sharpness of the moment. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking into myself. I was rising, though I hadn't yet moved. The power was no longer his, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on every guest, every whisper. Some avoided looking at me, their discomfort evident. Others stared openly, curious to see what would unfold, hungry for the drama they sensed was about to erupt. My brother cleared his throat, attempting to regain control, his voice louder now, edged with irritation. He called the groom by name, tried to laugh it off, tried to turn the spotlight back onto himself. But the groom didn't move. He stood rooted, his voice steady, his eyes never leaving mine. The word he had spoken lingered in the air like smoke, impossible to dispel, reshaping the room's energy in a way that even my brother could not undo. I felt the burn of years of suppressed rage mix with a strange calm, like standing on the edge of a storm and realizing the lightning would strike exactly where it was meant to. My brother looked at me then, really looked, for the first time in a long while. There was no humor in his gaze now, only suspicion and a flicker of fear. He knew this was no longer about his jokes, no longer a game he could win with charm and arrogance. Something had shifted, and though he didn't yet know what, he could feel the walls closing in. The groom took a step closer, and the air seemed to tighten with each movement. The guests fell into silence, their whispers dying as though they too sensed the gravity of what was about to unfold. My brother opened his mouth, but the words faltered, his confidence crumbling as quickly as it had flared. The bride's hand trembled against her dress, her eyes darting between me and the man she was about to marry, as though searching for answers that wouldn't come. I stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down. But instead of breaking me, it held me upright. The humiliation that had burned moments earlier transformed into something else, something steadier, colder, sharper than anger. For the first time, I wasn't the sibling mocked, the shadow ignored. I was the center, not because I demanded it, but because the truth, whatever form it was about to take, had chosen me. And as the groom finally opened his mouth again, preparing to speak words that would shatter the illusion of the perfect wedding, I realized that the night was no longer my brother's. It belonged to me. The hall seemed frozen in time, every eye locked on the space between me and the groom, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My brother shifted uneasily, his perfect facade cracking with each second of silence that passed. He tried to summon that old smirk, the one that had always won the room, back to his side, but it faltered, thinner than before, weaker. He looked at the groom, searching for an explanation, for some hint that this was just a poorly timed joke. But the groom's expression remained unflinching, his gaze steady on me as if he saw only me in that crowded room. The whispers began again, sharper now, filled with tension and intrigue. Guests leaned toward one another, their voices hushed but restless, carrying words like, "Why her?" and "What's happening?" through the hall. My heart pounded, not from fear but from a strange exhilaration. For years I had been invisible, pushed into the background while my brother basked in admiration. Yet now, with nothing more than a bow and a word, the groom had shifted the balance. The eyes that once overlooked me now searched for answers in my face. For the first time, I wasn't a shadow. I was the question no one could ignore. My brother's irritation grew, his voice rising as he tried to take back control. He joked again, louder this time, forcing a laugh as though volume could drown the unease creeping into the room. But his laughter sounded hollow, like a man desperate to hold on to something slipping beyond his grasp. He called out to me mockingly, hoping to drag me back into the role he had always assigned me, the punchline. Yet when I didn't flinch, when I didn't crumble under his words, the unease in his eyes deepened. He wasn't used to me standing still, standing strong, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The bride's discomfort grew more visible. She tugged at her dress, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze darting nervously between the two men. Perhaps she had sensed something before, a crack in the perfect story she thought she was stepping into, but she had chosen to ignore it. Now she couldn't. The groom's steady defiance made it impossible. Her groom, her supposed protector, her partner, had broken the script of the night, and instead of standing by her side, he stood facing me. The silence between us stretched longer, heavy with anticipation. The chandeliers above seemed to glow brighter, throwing harsh light across my brother's face, exposing the tension beneath his polished charm. He cleared his throat, tried to speak again, but the words caught. He wasn't in control anymore, and everyone could see it. For a man who had built his life on appearances, on always being the one who commanded the room, the loss of control was a humiliation greater than anything he had ever inflicted on me. I felt the weight of his years of mockery pressing against my chest, but instead of suffocating me, it fueled me. Every cruel joke, every time I was silenced, every instance of being made the lesser sibling, it all surged back, not as pain, but as strength. I didn't need to speak. My silence itself was louder than his laughter. My stillness was more powerful than his noise. And as I held the groom's gaze steady and unyielding, I realized something profound. My brother wasn't just being mocked back. He was being unmasked. The guests leaned closer, some wide-eyed with curiosity, others whispering anxiously as though they feared what was about to surface. The tension wrapped around the room like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating. No one dared to break it. No one dared to move. It wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a reckoning. The groom finally shifted, his hand brushing across the table as if grounding himself before he spoke again. His voice was calm, measured, but beneath it was a force that silenced even the smallest whispers. My brother's shoulders stiffened, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. He could sense it too. Whatever was about to be spoken would not be something he could laugh away. It would not be a moment he could rewrite with charm. It would be the unraveling of everything he had built. And as the groom drew in a breath, preparing to speak, the entire hall seemed to lean forward, waiting, dreading, hungering for the truth that lingered just beyond the edge of his words. The hall quivered with silence so thick it was almost unbearable. The kind that makes every sound, every breath, every shuffle of a shoe ring louder than it should. My brother's face had begun to harden, his features shifting from mockery to unease, then from unease to outright hostility. He didn't like being challenged. He never had. All his life he had played the part of the flawless golden boy, untouchable in charm, admired by family, envied by friends. And now, here, in front of hundreds, he felt that fragile facade tremble, not from anything I had done, but from the man standing beside his bride. The groom's eyes were fixed on me, unwavering, deliberate. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a glance. This wasn't coincidence. It was recognition. The kind of recognition that carried history. The guests sensed it too, their whispers sharpening into murmurs that spread through the hall like wildfire. Why her? What does he mean? What's going on? The confusion grew, feeding into the tension until the air itself seemed to tighten, suffocating, like a storm about to break. My brother tried to laugh again, louder this time, desperate, brittle. "What's this?" he said, his voice pitched higher than usual, cracking slightly at the edges. He gestured toward me with exaggerated disdain, trying to drag the crowd back to his side. "You bow to her, my sister? The one who—" He stopped himself, realizing too late that his words were not landing the way they once did. The laughter he expected from his audience never came. Instead, the guests only watched, their eyes darting nervously, their silence damning. For once, no one was laughing with him. The bride's hands trembled against the fabric of her gown, her expression torn between fear and disbelief. She looked at her groom as if silently pleading for reassurance, but he didn't meet her gaze. He was still looking at me, and in that gaze I saw something unfold, an intensity that carried both anger and sorrow, the kind of emotion that comes from truths buried deep, truths that demand to be spoken. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of years pressing against me. A part of me wanted to turn away, to retreat into the invisibility I had known for so long. But another part of me, stronger now, steadier, refused. I had endured too much, swallowed too many humiliations to falter when the tide was finally shifting. So I held his gaze, my silence daring him to continue. The guests leaned forward, some clutching their glasses tighter, others holding their breath, as if the entire room balanced on the groom's next words. The chandeliers seemed to hum overhead, their light casting sharp shadows across my brother's face, revealing every crack in his polished exterior. He was losing control, and he knew it. His eyes darted wildly, toward the bride, toward the groom, then finally toward me, with a flicker of panic that he couldn't quite hide. The groom took a step closer, his shoes clicking softly against the polished floor, each sound amplified in the stillness. His expression was grave, his jaw set with resolve. He opened his mouth, and though his tone was calm, it carried a finality that made the air itself vibrate. "You should know," he began, his words cutting into the silence like a blade. "This night isn't only about vows and promises. It's about truth. And the truth—" He stopped, his eyes never leaving mine, letting the suspense stretch, making every soul in the hall hang on the pause. My brother stiffened, his fists clenching at his sides, his entire body tensed as if bracing for a blow he couldn't stop. The bride's lips parted, her eyes wide, desperate for him to finish, terrified of what he might say. The crowd seemed to inch closer, breaths shallow, hearts racing. And in that single moment, before the words left his mouth, before the revelation shattered the fragile illusion of perfection my brother had built, I knew everything was about to change. The silence was unbearable, the kind that made even the smallest movements, someone's cough, the clink of a fork against glass, sound deafening. All eyes were on the groom, waiting, desperate for him to finish what he had started. My brother stood rigid, his face red with a mix of anger and fear, his confidence stripped away with every second that passed. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and for the first time in my life I saw him cornered. Not by me, not by any mistake of his own making, but by the truth about to surface. The groom's voice, steady and deliberate, cut through the tension. "Your laughter has always been loud," he said, his eyes flicking briefly toward my brother. "But behind that laughter hides cruelty. And behind that cruelty is a secret you've kept buried for years." The guests gasped softly, shifting in their seats, their curiosity turning into unease. My brother's smirk twitched, his mouth opening to interrupt, but no words came. The groom didn't give him the chance. Turning his gaze back to me, the groom's expression softened, though the weight in his voice only deepened. "You deserve to know," he continued. "You deserve to hear what he's hidden from you, what he's hidden from everyone here." The bride stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. She stared at her groom as though she no longer recognized the man she was about to marry. My brother's composure began to crack. "Stop this," he snapped, his voice sharp, trembling with a desperation he tried to mask. "You don't know what you're talking about." His eyes darted across the room, searching for support, but the guests weren't with him anymore. They were waiting, watching, the weight of the groom's words pulling them closer to me, away from him. The groom shook his head slowly, his voice calm but unyielding. "I know enough," Enough to end your charade." He stepped closer, his presence towering now, his eyes locked with mine as though the entire hall had shrunk down to just the two of us. "For years," he said, "you've been treated as the shadow, mocked, humiliated, made to believe you were less. But the truth is—" He paused, letting the silence stretch until the room throbbed with anticipation. My breath caught, my body rigid, as if every scar from the past had come alive in that moment. The groom's next words would either crush me or set me free, and I could feel the balance of my life hanging on his tongue. My brother's face was pale now, his eyes wide, his entire body betraying the terror of what was coming. The groom finally drew in a breath, his voice steady, his words cutting through the stillness like a knife. "The truth is, you were never the one at fault. It was him. All along it was him. And tonight, everyone will finally see it." The crowd erupted into gasps, murmurs, confusion, the energy of the room splintering into chaos. My brother stepped forward, his voice shaking as he shouted, "Lies! All lies!" But even as he spoke, the desperation in his tone betrayed him. His laughter, his confidence, his control, it was gone. The guests no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with suspicion, with unease, with the first cracks of doubt. The bride's eyes shimmered with tears, her hand trembling as she pulled away from his grasp. She stared at him as though seeing him for the first time, her voice trembling when she whispered, "What is he talking about?" But my brother had no answer, only stammering words that fell flat, powerless against the weight of the truth pressing in from all sides. And I, standing in the very spot where humiliation had moments ago threatened to swallow me whole, felt something I had never known in his presence: power. Not the power of cruelty, not the shallow triumphs he had paraded all his life, but the power of truth, sharp and unrelenting, finally cracking through years of silence. The hall was no longer filled with laughter and music. It was heavy with gasps, whispers, and the trembling silence of a truth that could no longer be contained. My brother stood at the center of it all, pale, his bravado shattered, his voice cracking as he tried to gather the broken pieces of his confidence. The guests looked at him with suspicion now, no longer charmed by his polished mask. The bride had stepped back, her tears smudging the perfect makeup she had worn with pride only an hour earlier. Her trembling voice broke the tension. "What is he talking about?" she demanded, her tone laced with fear as though she already knew the answer would ruin everything. The groom didn't flinch. His voice rang out firm and steady, every word heavy with finality. "What I'm talking about is the truth he's kept hidden while mocking the one person who never deserved his cruelty." His eyes flicked briefly toward my brother before returning to me. "You see, your brother has always built himself up by tearing others down. But he went further than that. He betrayed the very family he claims to love." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My brother shook his head violently, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "That's not true! He's lying." But the desperation in his tone betrayed him. His words no longer commanded the room. They scattered like broken glass, sharp but useless. The groom's jaw tightened. "Years ago," he continued, "he destroyed something that wasn't his to touch. He stole, he lied, and when the consequences came crashing down, he placed the blame on her." His hand lifted slightly, pointing toward me, "and let her suffer in silence while he walked away untarnished." His words echoed through the hall like thunder, each one striking at the foundation of my brother's carefully constructed image. The bride's sobs grew louder, her disbelief spilling into the open. "Is it true?" she cried, her eyes searching my brother's face. "Tell me it isn't true." But he couldn't answer. His lips parted, but no words came. His silence screamed louder than any denial. The guests recoiled, some shaking their heads, others whispering accusations, the weight of betrayal spreading like wildfire. My brother's shoulders slumped, his fists unclenching as he realized he had nowhere left to run. The smirk, the arrogance, the years of untouchable superiority, they were gone, stripped away in a single night. He stood exposed, a man undone by the truth he thought he had buried forever, and I, who had always been the shadow, stood unbroken. For the first time, I saw the shift in their eyes, the guests, the bride, even those who had once joined in his laughter. They no longer saw me as the target, the forgotten sibling, the quiet figure to be mocked. They saw me as the one who had endured, who had carried scars with dignity while he built his throne on lies. The bride tore the ring from her finger and hurled it at his chest, her voice trembling with rage and sorrow. "I won't marry a man who hides behind cruelty and lies," she spat, her tears falling freely. The crowd erupted into chaos, voices clashing in disbelief and outrage, and there I stood, calm amidst the storm, the humiliation that once burned in my chest now transformed into a steady flame of triumph. My brother had tried to break me in front of the world, but instead, the world had finally seen him for who he truly was. The groom's final words sealed it, ringing with authority that silenced even the loudest whispers. Tonight wasn't just about vows, it was about truth. And the truth is, he nodded toward me, was never the one to be mocked. She was the one to be respected. The chandeliers above swayed gently as though the very air had exhaled, the weight of revelation settling over every soul in the room. My brother stood alone, stripped of everything he had once wielded, while I, for the first time in my life, walked away not as the shadow, but as the storm that had finally broken his crown.